Hi, this is Sarit Switzer, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast, a podcast devoted to the teachings of Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi as recorded in his most famous work, the Tanya. My hope for this show is to make these teachings accessible and relatable to the average person, regardless of prior Jewish education or affiliation. The episodes follow the prescribed daily study portions and are meant to serve as practical lessons in how to live your life as your true self and develop an authentic and powerful relationship with your Creator. I have personally experienced the effects the study of this work has had on me, and I'm excited to share what I can of this knowledge with you. So please join me on this journey of learning, self-growth, and connection with your source. Hi, and welcome to the It Is Taught podcast. This is episode 633 for the 30th of Av in a regular year. Happy Rosh Chodesh. Today is day 1 of 2 of Rosh Chodesh Elul. So there is a book which I had mentioned previously on the podcast, I'm pretty sure. One of my favorite books, actually. It's called The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt. And in that book, Jonathan Haidt explores the concept of morality. And he talks about the idea that all of us live under this false illusion that our moral sensibilities are rationally based. And he really breaks it down to shreds, that concept and that notion. And he shows us how really morality is a lot more societally based and it's a lot more emotionally based than it is rationally based. He gives different examples for this. I may have mentioned some of them in previous episodes. You can look at the book you read the book. I encourage you to read the book to get the full context of it all. But the basic idea is that societal norms, which kind of like what society dictates morality to be and what society dictates values to be, are really kind of ever changing and evolving with time. So the one conclusion that I took from this book, which you may have been thinking of yourself, is that true morality really needs to come from Torah, because Torah is the one thing that is unchanging over time, which is true. This is very true. The commandments of the Torah are like our goalpost of like what is considered moral, what is our guiding post in life. But what we're going to be learning about today is that even when it comes to Torah, not that Torah changes, God forbid, through time, but that at different points in history, there have been and there are different focuses of what we place the emphasis on. So again, we can see this in a general historical way as well, that, there have been eras of history where wars have been very prevalent, and it was like the idea was really to be very brave and very noble. There were other times in history where intellectualism was valued really highly. So, for example, we had the Enlightenment era in Europe, which really dominated in the 17th and 18th centuries, which was really all about just being very intellectual, very rational, and that kind of thing. That was followed by the more romantic movement, which was more in the 1800s and like the 19th century. And so this was more of a focus on emotion and really embracing your emotions and being very passionate and that kind of thing. So why is it that we see that across history, there are these different emphases? There's these different types of values that we focus on to the point that even within the secular world, actual like morality, what's considered to be okay, what's considered not to be okay, is really does seem to fluctuate and to change. Well, so according to Torah, most namely Chassidus in specific, and we're going to be focusing on the Alter Rebbe's take on the matter, there actually is kind of this evolution throughout history. And he talks about it more in terms of from a spiritual perspective, not so much in terms of like, romanticism, intellectualism, all that stuff, even though I'm sure there are most likely going to be parallels that you could find with all of that. But the Alter Rebbe is actually going to teach us today that throughout history, there's actually been an evolution in terms of what it is that we should focus on in terms of our Torah values and in terms of our service of God. So while it's true that definitely we don't want to live under the false assumption that Torah changes. It's the same Torah, and Torah does not change. It's been the same Torah throughout time. The commandments don't change. There's never more commandments, less commandments, that kind of stuff. It's always been the same Torah. But nevertheless, the emphasis of what we place on those commandments do change over time. This is similar to something we spoke about in a previous episode about the idea of our own personal purposes in the world, and how, while each one of us, every Jew living on earth, has the same obligation to keep the same Torah, to keep the same mitzvahs. So we all need to keep Shabbos. We all need to keep kosher. We all need to give tzedaka. We all need to love our fellow Jew as ourselves, all of these things. Nevertheless, we do find that there are individual purposes amongst each of us. And the way that manifests is that we're going to have a certain attachment, maybe a certain passion, a certain feeling towards a certain mitzvah or a certain number of mitzvahs that feel more meaningful to us for some reason. And that most likely is because those are attached to our life purpose. And so what we're going to be talking about today is, while this is true for individuals, it's actually true on a global level, on a historical level, that throughout history, there have been different times when different aspects of the Torah, different aspects of mitzvahs have been more important or have been given greater emphasis and have been given lesser emphasis. So what the Alter Rebbe is going to focus on today is specifically two different types of emphasis. The first emphasis is the emphasis on Torah study, on intellectual development and an intellectual connection with Torah. And this is something which the Alter Rebbe ascribes to previous generations, and that this was something that previous generations were really supposed to focus on. This was like their main mission, was this more intellectual study, this more intellectual appreciation of Torah and attachment to Torah. And then by contrast, we have our generation, where our main emphasis here is actually not so much the intellectual aspect of Torah, but it actually has to do more with action. It has to do more with practical doing, which ultimately manifests in practical giving, which, once again, if you haven't noticed already, the theme of this section of the Tanya is tzedaka, giving tzedaka, doing charity, doing acts of chesed. And the Alter Rebbe is going to really argue that for the point that this is the point, this is the purpose of this generation, of our generation that we're living in. And he explains this by really talking about this evolution historically. When we look at the evolution of the Jewish people, it's not random. It's not just like chaotic, wandering around. There's a direction. We're going somewhere. We're leading towards Moshiach. And in that leading towards Mashiach, what's happening is the basic idea of Mashiach is that Hashem wants there to be a dira b'tachtonim. Hashem wants there to be a dwelling place here on earth, which means that Hashem wants his godly presence, the loftiest part of himself, to come down here into this physical reality, into the lowest of the low. So there's a progression with this, right? And if you think about this in terms of the spheros, then when we look at the spheros, there's the intellectual part of the spheros, there's the emotional part of the spheros, and then there's the more physical part of the spheros. And it really can be seen kind of as in this image. We can make a visual of a person when we think about it. Not to say that God forbid, is like a person or whatever, but we do use this imagery of a person to kind of have a way of relating to the spheros. So when we think about our generation, and the Rebbe spoke about this, and the Alter Rebbe is speaking about it here as well, is very, very close to Mashiach. We're almost there. We're almost at the end point, which means that in this chain of descent, through this body, so to speak, of the spheros, we're at the feet. And what are the feet? The feet are action. The feet is where you go, where you want to go. It's not a very intellectual part. When you walk, when you decide that you want to go to the store to pick something up, sure, you're thinking about, okay, I want to go to the store to pick this thing up, but you're not thinking consciously, putting one foot in front of the other. Assuming you know how to walk already, this is something that comes very naturally to you, and it just happens. It's a physical thing. And so this, the Alter Rebbe likens to our generation. We are the generation of the feet. And being the generation of the feet, being the generation of action, it's not so much about intellectual endeavor, even though, of course, like I said, it's the same Torah for all generations. So we still need to study Torah. We still need to use our brains. But the emphasis, the focus really should be on the feet, really should be on this physical action. So let's get into the text and see how the Alter Rebbe explains this. And for context, this is the second part, the second half of Epistle 9 of Iggeres HaKodesh, in Iggeres HaKodesh. And yesterday, the Alter Rebbe began this concept of leading us into preparing us for this emphasis on giving tzedakah by really reminding us. Yesterday was a wake-up call to remind us why we're really here and to remind us that we're not here for ourselves. We're here for God's sake. God put us here and God granted us a mission, and that mission is to give to others. And so now the Alter Rebbe continues today and he says, and thus, my beloved ones, my brethren. So again, he's speaking to his chassidim in a very loving and very close manner. He says, place your heart to these things that are written in a very short way. And then in brackets, he says, and if God should will it, I will speak these things face to face at length. So it sounds like the Alter Rebbe really wanted to say these things not only just in writing, but he actually wanted to say them face to face as well. So what are these things? That in these times, the main aspect of serving God in these times, which are the ikavot Moshiach, this is the footsteps of Moshiach, is giving tzedakah. So that is, he gets right to the point. He says, what's the main focus of our lives nowadays, of our world, is to give tzedakah. As our sages said, En Israel nigalin ela b'tzedakah. That, and this is from the Mishnah Torah, from the Rambam's Mishnah Torah. In the halachas actually dealing with giving to poor people, in the Hilchot Matanot Aniyim, in the beginning of chapter 10. And so basically, very simply, the way that we get redeemed, the way we bring Moshiach, is through tzedakah. We need to have tzedakah. Okay, now the Alter Rebbe brings up a seeming challenge to this idea. He says, is there not this idea that the sages of blessed memory taught? And this is from the Mishnah in Peah, Talmud Torah shakul keneged gmilut chasadim. That learning Torah is equal in weight, like gmilas chasadim, like doing chasad. Okay, so he says that, okay, how do we understand this? That in their times, in the times of these sages, then the main focus, the main work at that time, the main service of God was in learning Torah. And thus, these great sages, whether we're talking about the Tanaim or the Amoraim, the Tanaim were the sages of the Mishnah, the Amoraim were the sages of the Gemara, their main focus was to learn Torah, which is not the case now. When we're in the times of the footsteps of Moshiach, when the Sukkot David, the Sukkah of David, has fallen to the level of feet and akvaim and heels, which is the aspect of Asiyah. So just to understand that a little bit, so basically why the Sukkah of David? So the Sukkah of David is another term for the Shechina, which the Shechina once again is associated with Malchus. Like David was a king, right? It was the epitome of the king of Israel, the Melech Yisrael. So he served as a chariot for Malchus of Atzilus. And so this chariot of Malchus of Atzilus, basically this Sukkot David, this otherwise known as the Shechina, in our times, when we're at the level of the heels of Moshiach, it's like descending lower and lower and lower, and it's here in this level of Asiyah. And so thus, there is no way now to cleave to this because it's on the level of Asiyah. If we want to cleave to the Shechina, we can only cleave to it in a way of transforming the world from darkness into light, the darkness of the world into the light in the world. We also need to do this with Asiyah. So basically, if we want to connect to this Shechina, which has descended to the level of Asiyah, we need to act in a way of Asiyah. There's always this mirror thing going on, this parallel action. So how do we connect to Asiyah? What is the ultimate Asiyah? What is the ultimate action? This is the action of giving tzedakah. Right? So we've spoke about this previously, that tzedakah is often called action. It's doing, it's a deed. It's the epitome of what we can do in this world. As is known to the scholars, that the aspect of asiyah in godliness is what is godly doing. This is the aspect of bringing forth and drawing down a vitality down here to he who has nothing. Right? But like, what is it that God does? What is it when we talk about like the action of God? God is giving. God is pouring forth, bringing down to that which has nothing, namely the worlds or the worlds, whatever is not God. And so thus anybody who sacrifices their impulse to this and opens up their hands and their heart to this, then this will cause the sitra achra to be subdued. In Hebrew, eskafia sitra achra. And this will convert the darkness into the light of God that will dwell upon us in a way of asiyah, in a way of actual action in the heels of Moshiach. And this will lead them to ultimately see God. So this is a quote from Yeshayahu, chapter 52, verse 8, Ein be'ein b'shuv Hashem Tzion. Behold, eye to eye, Hashem returning to Zion, etc. So meaning to say that if we behave in a way of action to mirror God's action, which is God giving chesed, so we give tzedaka, this will lead to us actually seeing with our physical eyes God with the coming of Moshiach. Bimhera b'yameinu. So basically that's the basic idea. Is once again, the bottom line is give tzedaka. And again, the Alter Rebbe in each section of this Iggeres HaKodesh where he focuses on this, he tackles it from a different angle. So the angle that's focused on here is really looking at it from a historical context perspective. That sure, in previous generations, the focus was really on learning, and the focus was really on intellectual endeavor and learning Torah and all of that. But nowadays, we're closer to the time of Moshiach. So what's required of us now is the giving of tzedaka. So perhaps this is our own Torah version, lahavdil, of this idea of what Jonathan Haidt talks about how norms, societal norms change and values change over time, depending on the context, depending on the history and things like that, and how we see it really very much in the world, how different values change over time. So too for Torah. It's not that our values intrinsically change, chas v'shalom, but there is a change in emphasis depending on where we're at. And so the emphasis now, once again, is to give tzedaka and to do chesed and to be kind and good to your fellow Jew and to your fellow neighbor. That's it for today. And we will continue tomorrow when we begin a new epistle, and I'll speak to you then. Thanks for listening to the It Is Taught podcast, hosted by Sarit Switzer. This podcast is dedicated in loving memory of my maternal grandfather, Avraham Yitzchak ben Binyamin HaKohen of blessed memory. Music by Shoshana. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the show, please share it with others and subscribe on YouTube, Apple iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And make sure to leave us a 5-star review. To find out more about the It Is Taught project, including more information on my soon-to-be published book, please visit our website, itistaught.com. To catch the latest from me, follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Looking forward to speaking with you tomorrow, and until then, have a great day.